to Sunlit Brushstrokes. My name is Jessica, and today we're going to be having some fun exploring loose and playful watercolor techniques. We're going to be working on cheap watercolor paper as well as 140-pound cold press paper so that we can explore the differences between them, and I'll share how I adjust my techniques based on the paper I'm using. This is going to help you get great results with the paper you have on hand. We're going to be painting some sweet peas and some daisies, which are the April birth month flowers. So these will make a perfect gift or card for celebrating an April birthday. Because we're covering so many projects in one video, we're going to be skipping the drawing, and if you would like to follow along, you can purchase these traceable outlines in my Etsy shop. This will provide us with a simple loose structure on which we can explore with all of our loose and playful techniques. I'll include a link for those in the description below. Now, one thing I want to mention before we get started today is that I do have a few spots left in my upcoming live Zoom workshop. If you've ever wanted to ask an artist questions while you're painting or get immediate feedback on your work, that's what this workshop is all about. It's a chance to learn and grow and get personalized guidance in a small group setting. We'll be painting together on the afternoon of April 5th from 12 to 3. If you'd like to save your seat or learn more about it, you can find the link in the description below. Now let's get back to today's video. All right, so for these sweet peas, I have transferred this one onto a cheaper watercolor paper. This is Canson XL, and so it's not as suitable for layering, but it's really nice for loose, simple work. So I'm gonna show you a more loose, simple approach for this one. And then this one, I'm gonna layer just a little tiny bit so you can kind of see two more or less loose approaches, but this is gonna allow me to add a little more layering. This one is gonna just be more loose and flowy. And so you can kind of see which version you like better, or you could do whatever you want with yours. So I'm just gonna go ahead, I'll start with this one so that it can start to dry after I lay that first layer on. And for this one, I'm gonna just use a variation of kind of pinks and purples. I have quinacridone magenta here, right here. This has got a tiny little bit of ultramarine blue, but I think what I'm going to mainly do with this one is just use ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta and just go with those colors and see how it turns out. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and wet it. And I'm not going to worry about getting these petals separated for now. I'm just going to fill the whole thing in with this beautiful color, or beautiful few colors. I'm going to let it run together a little bit. I didn't intend to wet that section there. It's a little bit wet. That's okay. If I have a little bit of water run in there, I'll show you what I do to soak it up. So I'm just going to wet the whole thing, and I'm using a soft brush. You could use any brush. You could use a firm brush to wet. This soft one will allow more water into, or onto the paper rather. But when I start working, especially as I get tighter, I'll move into a firm brush. And I'm wishing I had lifted some of these pencil lines, but oh well, I didn't. So I'm just gonna go with it. I'm gonna use this big fat brush still as I have in my hand, and it's gonna allow me to work pretty quickly. So I'm just gonna drop this quinacridone. It's almost straight quinacridone magenta. It does have a tiny, tiny little bit of ultramarine in it, but not much. So I'm gonna drop it in there and drop a little bit here. And then what I'm gonna do is go ahead and just guide it around a little bit here in a minute. And I'm gonna make some of them just a little bit more purple, but let's just grab a brush. This is a little bit firmer, and I'm going to use this to kind of help guide the paint. So we have a little bit more control with this particular flower. So I'm going to do that. I don't want to have it so that everything completely turns the same shade of pink everywhere. I still want to have some variation, but I still want to have at least enough movement in the paint that at least I have pink pretty much coming to the edges of my petals. So I don't want to have I don't mind a few little white specks, but I don't want to have it too washed out. I actually kind of like that right there after I just said I don't want to wash it out. I'll just bring a little bit of pink just to the edge so we at least have a little bit more of a defined edge to this flower. I don't want to have it so white that it fades in the background. And I'm just going to dab a little bit right here because this is a lighter section that I accidentally got water on. And I'm really liking that. I'm wondering if I want to just drop a tiny little bit of purple into some of them. So I'm just going to grab my ultramarine blue, and I'm going to mix a little bit of, ooh, that's going to be really deep, but mixing a little bit of it into my quinacridone magenta here. And then I'm just going to drop it just in a few places. So we have a little bit of a variety, but like I say, I'm going to be coming in with a second layer. So it doesn't matter if I get it perfect this first go. How much more do we actually want? I like the purple, but I don't want to overdo it. You know what? I might just put a little bit of purple on this one and then let it mainly just stay as it is. I really like that pink color. I'm just into it right now that it's new. New for me, I should say. And I don't want to have things mush too much. I'm going to just let it be like that. I like how loose and flowing that is. Maybe I'll even just soak a tiny little bit. This purple is getting pretty dense and dark. I might even soak just a tiny bit of it out. I don't know. Like I say, I want to keep this loose and simple. Let's leave it like that. And maybe we could throw a little bit of green in for the leaves. Do we want to do that right away? We could. It's just it will flow into the flowers if we do it right now, which you'll see. You can decide if you would like that flow to happen right now or if you prefer to just have control. So I'm going to mix it up anyway. You can see how it works. So I'm going to start out with some of my yellow, and I'm just going to go in here where I already have some green. And actually that's looking really pretty and vibrant already. I could almost just use that color. I really like that color with that one. Maybe I'll just grab a little bit of phthalo blue, teeny little bit from over here, and just mix that in there. Okay, this is very springy and vibrant. I like that. I'm gonna just go ahead and use it. So I'll just quickly, again, I'm using my looser techniques. I'm using this Artegria brush again. I'm not gonna do all the, ooh, whoopsie. There was some pink on there still. Okay, let's switch over and just use this other brush. This is just a smaller Artegria, so it will hold a lot of water still, but yeah, a little bit less than before. I'm gonna just drop a little bit extra water onto my brush or dip it into the water so I'm nice and flowing. And I'm just gonna do these nice stems here. And then I have to be aware that when I come up here with my green and touch the flower, it could bleed in because it's still kind of wet. See what it just did there? If you like that, let them touch. If you don't like it, you have two options. Let everything dry first, or just don't touch your flower with your green brush. Does that make sense? So I'm gonna do some of these right now. Again, I maybe should have erased some of my outlines. That's okay. Makes it easier to see in the video. I'm gonna do these little leaves here, and I'm going to actually grab I should say my larger Artegria brush so that I get a little more water in here. So this is the larger one, I just cleaned it off, and I'm gonna grab the green. And I'm gonna change the pressure I put on my brush. So I go heavy, and then I kind of lighten off, and then I'm gonna go thin and very fine as I come to the tip of the leaf, and then I'm changing the shape a little bit, as you can see. But when I want to kind of do the body of this leaf, if you will, or the thickness of the leaf, I'm pressing heavier on my brush. Now I have a ton of paint there. It could create a bloom, but on Arches watercolor paper, it's a little less likely to do that. I'll come in there in a minute and soak some of that up. I'll just do this while I've got the green on my brush. And do this little thing too. And then I'm going to drop a little bit of darker green into here. Actually, that's not so bad. It's a little bit puddly, but not bad. So to get darker green, I'll just grab a little bit more of my phthalo blue, mix it into this same well here, and then I'll just drop a little bit more down here in a few places. And often I don't go with such a bright, intense green, but I thought, hey, this is springy. Let's go with a little more intensity today than I usually would use. So I'm just using the tip of my brush right now to kind of drop a little bit of that darker green color in here. And then I'm going to just let it be. So I'm just dropping in a few places. I might even just lift in a few places. It's right here. You could always lift a little of the paint out of it to get it looking lighter, like almost white. So that's how much I'm lifting. I'm lifting and drying my brush, lifting, drying my brush if I want a little bit of a softer, almost whitish color. Maybe just a tiny more of a, I don't know, just a little something. Maybe I'll grab a little of this ultramarine blue. It's got a tiny bit of purple in there, but mostly ultramarine blue. Just drop it a few places. Just feel like it needs a little bit of dulling down. Just a tiny little bit. I tend to like my greens to be more dull in general, but I do want a springy effect, but I still think even for the springy look, I want a little bit of dullness. So my ultramarine blue that, like I say, you can see it's a little on the purple side, just the way I have my palette there. It's a little messy, which is helping to dull this green down a bit, because the purple color will help neutralize the green. All right, I'm going to let that be, let it dry, and I'll come back and add some details after. Now I'm going to do a very similar technique with this one, only this one I'm not going to be coming back in after I've layered that first layer on. So I'm going to end up going a little deeper and darker in some areas, but I will show you what I'm going to do. I do really like when I'm working on cheap paper to go really, really loose and let petals happen. So it's going to look like little water control. It's going to be kind of blooming, puddly, and I'm using my Artegria brushes here, which are going to hold more water and actually encourage things to be puddly and blooming, which is what I'm after for this particular one, just because the paper lends, I think the flat, cheaper paper and these brushes lend themselves well to that. So you'll see what I mean in a minute here. Definitely it's harder to control your water on cheap paper, and I'm like, let's go with that. Like, let's make it uncontrolled. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe work on a few flowers at a time. I'm going to skip around so that I'm not doing flowers that are touching each other to start with. I can after, but I'm going to kind of just skip around so that I don't have everything bleeding together quite yet. So let's just go ahead and do a flower here, do a flower there. You can even just do a single petal if you want to. So I'm going to do that in a few places. Just pick a petal here, pick a petal there. That one's touching that. Oh well. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm going to start with, I think, a little bit of quinacridone rose this time. So it's a little bit of a warmer pink than the quinacridone magenta. And I'm going to drop that in, and you're going to see it's going to be a little less purpley, a little bit more pinky. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to go a little bit like heavier, kind of at the base of the flowers, kind of like this. So where the flower kind of goes close to the sepal, that's where I'm dropping this in. Maybe I'll do it maybe a little bit here. I can come over here a little bit. And you can see how this just kind of bleeding around, and it's really loose. And you can guide it a little bit, but we're going to get some blooms happening, and that's going to be really pretty. So like I say, I'll guide it around. Maybe I'll put just a little tiny bit kind of at the outline of some of these flowers. I don't really like outlining my paintings too much, but because some of them are going to be really almost like white at the edges, and then you're just going to see that pencil line, I'm going to kind of put a little bit of paint, just a tiny bit. There's hardly any on my brush, but just so that I don't look like it doesn't look completely like it fades into the background or the white paper entirely, right? You know what I'm saying? Just a little tiny bit. Okay, I really like those. Put a little bit here once again. This is actually, you see a little bit of like that cauliflower thing starting, not too intensely. Okay, now what I'm going to do is come in and use maybe like a periwinkle color. So I'm going to use mainly the ultramarine blue with just a tiny little bit of the red in it, or the purple. So I'm going to just wet, like you can see this shape here is already wet. I'm going to do, ooh, that's not even all the same flower. That's okay. I'm going to do all this one kind of like this shape here, kind of bluish, and this one here kind of bluish. And anywhere else? I might just go with that for now and then decide if I want them to run together, but I'd rather kind of start with a little more control and then I can decide. So I'm going to just come right in here, and you can see I've got my ultramarine blue, but I have a little bit of those purple colors in my well. So you could just add a little of the quinacridone magenta or quinacridone rose in there, just to kind of make your blue just a smidgen bit on the purple side. And I'm going to drop that a little bit there, a little bit here. I'll guide it in a minute. And anywhere else? I think that's good. Now I'm just gonna, maybe I'll grab another brush. I'm pretty funny. I don't like using the same brush just because I don't like washing my paint constantly into my water. I'd rather guide things with a clean brush. That's just a little quirk that I have, but it's also convenient. It's a great tip. Depending on your technique, you might be like, okay, this is really helpful. With what I'm doing right now, it's probably whatever. Okay, didn't intend to have it flow into there, but it did. That's okay. I don't want to do too much mucking around after that's happened, because like I say, I want those cauliflower kind of things happening. So I'm going to let those just be. Now everything's kind of touching. I'm trying to figure out if I want to, if I go ahead and start like filling in these ones that are touching, the paint will go poof, whatever color I add, it will kind of like leak into the ones I've just done. So it's like, it's a risk. Let's do it to one and see what we think of it. Okay, so let's just do it to this one right here, and it will leak into the petals beside it. I'll just pick this one right here, and you can already see that one is running together. Let's pick, for a color, I've got over in this middle section, I have a purple that was made with quinacridone rose and ultramarine blue, so it's a little more dull than the one with the ultramarine, or the quinacridone magenta. This is the rose color with the blue, so a little bit confusing there, but because I use the rose, quinacridone rose here, I'm thinking let's do more of that. Just keep the color harmony a little bit. So that's why I'm using this particular purple here. And you can see, yes, it's bleeding into there. Do you like that look or not so much? It's probably a little too wild, right? So let's just not do that to the rest of them. Let's let that one be for now. I don't mind a little bit of that bleeding, but it's maybe a bit much. So I'm going to let that one just be. Maybe I could do over here. No, I think I really want to let them not bleed together. So I'm just going to let them be. The other thing you can do actually is if you don't want them to bleed together, you can wet your shape and I haven't touched to the very, very edge where the blue, it meets the blue one. So then I can come in with my purple and almost like I've got a dry edge there. Do you see what I'm saying? That dry edge allows me to drop my purple in and not have it bleed into this one. So I actually don't mind that. Let's just spread that around. Maybe that's how I can finish filling these shapes in, is to just not come up to the edge. Let's just do that. So trying very hard not to touch. Ooh, I'm starting to touch that one. You see what I just did there? I feel like I've got a little bit of a shakes. Too much coffee today. But that actually worked. It's for the most part, it's bleeding right there, but for the most part, it's not touching the other one. It's doing it a touch there. I'm okay with just a little bit of that. So let's just keep doing that. If you really don't like any of those colors crossing the lines, that's where you just want to let all of, say, the pink dry, and then all of the blue dry, and then come and do the purple. If anything touches, that's where our problem is happening. So just guide that around a little bit and do a little bit more maybe here. Again, try not to touch your petals that are wet. Okay, it's working okay. What do you guys think? Ooh, I just touched that one. You can see it bled in there, which again, that's a look. It's okay. That is kind of the beauty of working on this cheap paper too, is we're going to get a really bloomy, kind of less controlled look. So I think I'm okay with that. And you know what? I didn't have drawn in here. I didn't have a little flower of any kind, but it's looking empty other than I'm going to have stems. I'm wondering about creating just a little, you could draw it in or whatever. I'm just going to draw like a petal, kind of like that. Doesn't make much sense, but it's going to just add a little something. And I might do it with the blue color because I only have like 2 flowers with that blue, right? So put a little water and then, okay, the purpley blue. I'm going to put it in there. And again, not touching because I'm touching, coming against my petal or little flower petals that are still wet. But you can see, there we go. I think that helped. It's just nicer to have 3, I think, blue. Ooh, okay. Wasn't trying that. I had purple on my brush. That's pretty though, right? Okay, let's leave it be. And it will just give the impression that there's something of a flower back there or of a petal back there. And it could even create a little bit more to it. There we go. Makes it look more like a flower, maybe. I'm going to soak it up because I did like it the way it was. So just putting my brush in there, drawing my brush. So my brush is thirsty and that's why it's lifting that out. So I, make a thirsty brush by dabbing on my paper towel. All right. That's looking kind of pretty. What I'm going to do now is just grab my green, and I think I want to have a little bit more of the yellow in here again. So we get a nice bright springy green, and yes, I'm messing up my yellow here. Don't do that to yours if that annoys you. I'm wondering if I want to go even darker. You know what I might do? Because I have ultramarine in here, let's create some color harmony by throwing ultramarine blue and a little bit of this color right into our green, and it's going to change our green. But I like that green. It's a little bit more harmonized with the rest of this, so I'm going to just use it. Okay, and you can see I created that little bleed. Don't like it, don't touch your petals when you do this. You could come like that and then stop. Or decide every now and then you touch your petals and every now and then you don't. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab this other little brush and I'm going to fill my flower, or the leaves in with some water and then drop the green in. So let's do that. A little bit of water, and then I'll drop the green, and that'll allow it to kind of get a really pretty flow. So I'm just putting the green kind of on the outside, almost like outlining these little petals, or sorry, not petals, leaves. And you can see you got a really pretty effect. If you don't like how much white is there, just drop a little more green in, or even drop a little bit of our ultramarine mixture here, and it will deepen it a little bit if you like that deep dark color. Or if you want more springy, vibrant greens, just go ahead and use a more vibrant green. Like I say, I feel like this one really kind of, it harmonizes because it's got the ultramarine in it, which makes it a little bit more dull because of the red in the ultramarine. And I mean, even like, I had purple in my palette. I didn't just have ultramarine there. Okay, I have something coming up to here. Make a stem there. And then I have to decide how much I want to actually come up into here. I kind of like how it's bleeding in there. Let's do a little bit of these little sepal leaves in here. And we'll decide if they're bleeding around too much, we won't do it yet. I feel like the amount I'm touching is okay. I do these little curly things. I guess they're tendrils, right? On a pea plant. Yeah, I think that's kind of pretty. I'm going to come in. I realized I missed a little petal there. And this here, it's kind of more of a whitish color. And because I kind of did follow a reference when I did that, I'm debating if I want to leave it white. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go ahead, put some water in there. And I'm going to let the green kind of run into it. Just like that. Because it kind of sometimes has a touch of green. And you know what? I'll throw a little bit of the quinacridone rose again. So from over here, switch my palette around and just drop a tiny bit of the rose in the top and just let it do what it wants to do. We're being non-photorealistic. We're just having a fun time with our shapes that we created. Okay, last one. I'm gonna come in here and just put a little bit of one of my colors here. Which one do we want to go with? I think some more quinacridone rose because it feels like we need just a little more of it. Again, I'm just dropping it just kind of towards the tip and letting it flow. And maybe I'll just dab it out. It's a little bit too strong. All right, I'm just noticing here, I kind of skipped a little bit, didn't I? And I don't mind that, but it looks a little bit like it needs to be joined. Sometimes a skip is pretty, but that one was kind of bugging me. And now everything is kind of at a weird state of like wet versus dry. So it's kind of funny to start dropping more color in here because I will get blooms, but I'm going to just take the risk anyways because I'm not liking this petal, or sorry, this leaf. I keep calling them petals. We'll see if I like how this goes on here when it's semi-wet. Yeah, I don't mind that. I think it's okay. Sometimes you have to be careful when you jump in to something that's half dry, but I think that's okay. All right, so I've let this dry and you can see there are some areas I kind of wish that I would have maybe separated, like what I did here, right? I painted that and it was all wet at the same time, which is why these little areas aren't separated from the others. And that's not the brightest choice on my part to do all of those at one shot. It looks pretty, but you can see this is no longer separated. So what I could do, this is a little bit risky with this cheap paper. I typically don't like to add a layer. Like I said, I wasn't really thinking I would, but if I want to separate, say, that little piece from these other two, I could just wet that one little piece and then come in with a little bit of my paint. I can use that same kind of bluey ultramarine color. And I could put that in there and it sort of separates it a little bit. I'm not wanting to go too extreme here. I don't want it to like stand out too much compared to the rest of the painting. Put a little more water to kind of move that around a bit. And because that shape is so small, I think I got away with it. I could even bring it out a little bit like that and help separate things. I could do that as well right here with this little shape. Maybe I'll put a little bit of the purple color in it. So some of this one that we already used. And again, I can sort of separate that just out a little bit because that one section almost to me was a little too blurred together. And it did work. Those tiny shapes, it did work. Sometimes when you try and layer with this cheaper paper, it just lifts because the paper is so smooth that the paint sits on top instead of really settles, I think is the way to explain it. It just doesn't stay put for you as well when you come in and try and do a second layer. If you're using a soft brush like this one, it can work as well just because this soft brush isn't as likely to pull paint off. You can see if I'm rubbing on this pink shape right here, I don't know if you can tell that, but I'm lifting a little bit. It's hard to see. I can zoom in. I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to lift it, but I wanted to wet this and separate this from this shape. You can see it's moving around the pigment and lifting it, which is why I typically would prefer to get it on there, leave it alone. Don't try and add a second layer, but I'm going to just do a little bit right here and see how it goes. You can do it. You just have to be aware it will lift, and it's not, I don't know, in my opinion, is great. So I just wanted to show you though, you can separate them, and we are going to do more separating of the petals on our Arches watercolor paper with the painting we started earlier. So I'm going to move over to that now. Just move this, let it dry. You can see we've created a little bit of separation in the petals. Let's change it up a little bit. Whereas this one right here, we did this on Arches 140-pound cold press water paper, or I should say I did it on that paper. And so things are locked in a different way. So I'm going to be able to add another layer now, and things are not going to lift. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I want to do is push some of the petals separate from each other. So if I want this petal here to be in front, I can make the petals that are behind it a little darker where the edges meet. So I'm going to go ahead, wet that area again. So I'm not wetting this shape, just this shape here. And then I'm going to come in where the edges are meeting. So I want to grab this color that we were using earlier, and I don't mind a little more blue in it this time because we're getting a little bit into the shadows, and it's going to create a little bit of variety in our pink shapes. So I'm just going to, that's a lot. I'm just going to dab it off. And this is where you can also grab a firmer brush if you prefer, because it's going to help you to have a little more water control. I'm just going to do that. And you know what? I do enjoy these little firm brushes here for soaking things up. They do a better job soaking the water. They hold less water. So I'm going to just use it and do something like that. And I'm going to actually come in and separate things further in a little bit. So that's all I'm going to do for now. I'm just going to lift some of it out because, like I say, I am planning to get darker. So I don't want to be too dark. You might have liked how much water I had. If you like a little more water, that does give the watercolor look. You can just kind of drop a little bit more in there. I just didn't want too much pigment. Now let's separate this one here. So I'm going to separate right here. So this petal here, where it separates right in the middle there, I'm going to just put a little bit of the same color. So again, the color I'm working with is the mixture of quinacridone, magenta, and ultramarine blue. This is just that little bit more purple, right? Whereas our other painting here, this one, we use more of the quinacridone rose. So let's go into here and just separate those a little bit. Now that's a very strong pigment and it doesn't take much. So just put a little bit there. And I could put a little bit in this section here, or I can wait and deal with it maybe after, give it some definition. One more, let's go over here. And let's, in this case, let's go ahead and push this, like all of these back from this. Let's make this one kind of more the front petal. I am just going to use my Simply Simon's brush, which does kind of, like I say, hold less water, but that's okay. I'm going to use it. And then again, drop in that color. This time I'm going to go a little bit more. You can see I've got more of the blue on this side of the well in my palette. I'm going to grab more of the bluey stuff this time. Maybe even grab just a little more ultramarine blue out of my pile here. Ooh, maybe not quite that much. Anyways, make it more of like an intense purple. So I'm going to come in here, put a little bit where the edges meet. And I'm going to do a little bit of that back here and over here. And yes, I'm using very intense pigment, clearly putting more on my brush than I need. So I'm going to water that down a bit, drop some water in there and just let it flow around. And I'm going to keep separating these as it dries, and you'll see it come to life with each layer. So we're just doing some really basic layering, but it's going to allow us to separate things. And I think I'm happy with that. So I'm going to let that be for now. And then I'm going to go ahead and maybe throw a little bit more of our greens in here. So let's grab the green, and this green now I've got kind of a weird mixture, don't I? Because I have both blues in there, which is fine, but I'm going to try and get it brighter again. So back to brighter colors. All right, let's go ahead in here now, and maybe I'll wet that shape first and then drop the green in. And I will do that and put a little bit here. Actually, I'm going to be careful because that's wet. I'll just have to be careful where I put my green over here. Just be aware of where you have wet on your paper here. Okay, let's try that. I'm going to actually define these leaves in a minute, but let's just start here. Just drop some of this green in. You can see I left a little bit of white even. I kind of like that, but I might throw a little of the darker green in a minute. So just drop the light green in first. I have to be careful over here because, like, you know, I do have, I'm going to create a little bit of a sepal leaf there. Yeah, I like that. Anyways, I was going to say, as you know, this is wet here, right? So I need to be careful if I don't want the green to go poof into the pinky color. You can see it's doing that to the purple. I don't mind a bit of that, but you just have to be aware, right? How much of it you want. You do it everywhere. It gets too mushy. You do it a little bit. It looks pretty. I'm just going to fill in these little shapes here. And yeah, I kind of like that. And I'm just going to dig over here where I've got a little darkness still in my green. I might need to go a little darker still. Let's just grab, let's grab some more of the phthalo blue. It really doesn't matter. We're going to get a good enough green either way. And I'm just going to drop a little bit of the deeper green here. A little bit along there, just a little bit here. So I'm just like dropping little touches of it into my wet paint, right? So it's just giving just a little hint of definition to the green. A little bit more under here. A little bit there. And then I do want to define these leaves a bit. So I'm just going to grab my water brush and maybe take this lower half, wet it, and define the middle line here. So let that move around a little. A little bit more of our phthalo blue in here. Ooh, going outside the lines. It's okay. It's supposed to be kind of simple, but if you can help it, don't go to the lines at this point. Okay. Yeah, I think that helped create a bit of definition. I'm going to do the same thing over here. Do I want to do top or bottom? I'll do the lower section of the leaf. And grab a bit of our darker bluey green and separate them a bit. That just gives us a little bit of definition. Just drop that color in. We could even, you know what would look really pretty? Is to drop a tiny bit of this color over here in there. Creates a little bit of harmony, so color harmony rather. So I'm just going to drop it. Once you do this, you don't want to mush it around. It can get very muddy in a hurry. You can already see it almost looks muddy even though I didn't move it around. So just be aware of that. If you drop any extra colors in, they can do that. I might just throw a little water over here and see if it wants to come over here and just put a little bit of that pinky color over here too. This is again the quinacridone magenta. That's better. I like it better with less of the purple in it where it's dry. Yeah, I wish I had done that, you know that? I wish I hadn't have put the dark green there. Would have, like, because both colors were wet at the same time, here it worked because this green was dry, right? Here it went more muddy because this dark green was wet. So that's why it kind of muddied up for us there. It's okay. I don't mind it. I wanted a little bit of harmony. I wanted some of these colors kind of reflecting downwards. Maybe make it a little more purple since the one above it is a purple leaf. This is getting a little bit more advanced to try and mix these other colors in there. But anyways, let's move on. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of pink in this top area here. Again, this is the quinacridone magenta, just a little bit to define this. It's a little bit, I know I've got it a little bit darker. Let's just throw a little bit of water in there to help it move around. I know I'm working really close to that wet shape, but that's okay. I think I'm happier with this, just having a little bit of this color in this little section of this little petal here. Maybe lift it out a little bit, getting a little carried away. Okay, that's all I'm going to do there. And I'm going to let that dry before I come back in and do the final little touches to these little flowers. Okay, so now that this is dry enough, I'm going to come in and just create a little more definition. So all I'm going to do is the petals that I want to really push back further, I'm just going to wet them. So like here and here, I'm going to wet these again, and then I'm going to grab my quinacridone magenta color with a little bit of that kind of bluish, ultramarine blue, whatever, and drop it just in here, and that's going to push these petals even further back compared to the ones in front. You can already see how things are getting pushed back, right? Like this one's looking like it's further than this one, just because of the way we darkened the edges. So that's going to push these ones back now. And I'm just going to create a little definition around the outside. I feel like I've lost that a little bit. It's going a little goofy here. You don't have to have the entire petal darker. It really just has to be where those edges are meeting. But in this case, this one is kind of getting all darker, isn't it? I'll lift it a little bit because it doesn't have to be darker everywhere, just where it's meeting the petals in front of it. Put a little more. I'm being persnickety K. Let's stop that. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit onto here just to define the tiny petals of this sweet pea. Then I'm just going to go ahead and do this little shape back here. I think this one's already defined enough, so just grab some more of this purple color and push that right here, and that's going to separate. Oh, I grabbed the right one. I was thinking I'll grab the wrong purple. No, this is the purple I wanted. Just put a little bit here, and it's going to, again, you can see right away we've pushed that one back. The other thing you could do if you wanted to get more detailed is create a little bit of texture, and I'm not necessarily sure we want to do that, but you could. Okay, I'm just wetting those two shapes. I'll show you what I mean. You can decide if this is something that you want to do. You need to have the paper to be a certain level of dry, and I'll try and see how dry this is. If it's too wet and I do this, everything's just gonna go poof, the paint is gonna go everywhere. If I'm dry enough, like this is just damp and my brush isn't soaking wet, I should be able to get like some little lines, creases, whatever, you know, you kind of see a little bit of that in a sweet pea. Okay, I'm too dry. You're ideally wanting it to just give you like a little soft edge. So I'm just gonna come in with my water brush and soften those. Put a little more water, because I'm clearly too dry. And then I can just kind of come like this and just create a little bit, but it's not necessary to create that texture. But if you wanted more texture, you can definitely get that when you're using Arches watercolor paper, because it allows you to come back in and layer more details and more details and more details. So you can decide what you prefer. But if you like the idea of throwing a little bit of these little lines in here, that's how you would go about doing it. Optional, because I think it was kind of pretty already. Or you can just choose to do it on certain petals, like this one up here. If you think it's too boring, you can always just do a few little lines kind of following the direction of the way the creases and the folds probably would be in that petal. Again, nice, not necessary. So like I say, I want to keep this more or less simple. I just want to show you that you have that option if you want it. All right, but let's move on. And I'm thinking I'm mostly happy with this. I'm just wondering if I want to drop a little tiny bit of dark green in a few places. Otherwise, I'm going to call it good. I want this to be overall kind of loose. I might even let the green kind of bleed into the base of this a little bit. Sometimes with sweet peas, they can have a little bit of a green color in this area. So I might do that a little bit too. So I'm just going to grab my green. I've wet that shape. I'm just going to drop a tiny bit of green, maybe just at the very bottom right here. And maybe right here, so it looks like it's kind of just bleeding off of the stem a little bit. And that just gives it a little bit of definition. I could have even done that with like a blue-gray. And then I think, like I say, I just want to put a tiny bit of the darker green just in some of these stems that just seem like they're almost too vibrant, because all I did is put that dark green, or light green rather, there. So I'm just going to put a little bit of the darker green just in a few places, and then I'll blend it out with a water brush. Again, I'm probably getting a little persnickety for being simple. That's just a little option if you feel any areas are too intense of green. Oh, you know what? One thing I want to do before I move on. Now this one I'm going to do it too as well, because I'm noticing the way that the paint spread, it's kind of going this direction. So if I put a little bit of detail, again, optional, it was pretty as is, but if I make it come like this, woo, in this case, you can tell I'm too wet, because it just, you see what I did? It went poosh. And I actually, to give it a minute to dry maybe. Oh, it's coming now. I create a few of these little lines. Again, I want them to go more this direction because they're radiating out. You could almost say from the sepal of the flower, right? Or where the base of the flower is. But in this case, my brush was so wet that it just kind of, yeah, bled more than I wanted it to. Okay, enough of that. That's good. I think that one's done. I think it's really cute. What do you think? All right, so for the daisies, I want to make a shadow color. Now, sometimes the shadow color on a daisy can be a little bit like a blue color because it's like almost like acting like a mirror and reflecting the sky color. Other times it can be a little bit more grayed down. So what I'm going to do, I've got a mixture of my blues. I put a little bit of phthalo blue, a little bit of ultramarine blue. I don't know that I am happy with that. We'll see if I'm happy with the combination. I'm going to grab a little bit of this purple mixture here that I have. And the purple mixture was just made from the ultramarine and quinacridone rose. Okay, this is way too blue still. I'm thinking I want to gray it down a little bit. That's a really, really pretty color. I'm just wondering if I want to gray it down a little. Let's just test it on a scrap of paper. Not bad, but why don't we gray it down just a little tiny bit? So we'll just throw in a kind of a muddy color here. Let's try this orangey stuff that I've got mixed up. We'll see how it works. This might be too much. I don't want to gray it down too much. Just a little bit, you know, so that it's not quite as intense. Yeah, I kind of like that. It's just a little bit more like a blue-gray. Let's see how we like this one. Of course, I'm going to be watering it down a ton as well. But yeah, I think I like that better. If you like it more intense, you could make it more intense. Like if you want a blue-gray that's, or even a blue rather, that's a little bit more like, you know, any of the blues, there's no reason you can't go a little bluer. If you prefer that one, you could. I kind of like that, but I'm just not sure that that's going to be, maybe if I had two. That would be actually good. I might dip into the ultramarine a little bit as I go. I'll start with this one though. Alrighty, so I'm going to use a smaller brush with this, and I'm actually going to create some fun texture. And I'm not going to wet everything first. I'm just going to kind of do this. I'm going to show you. I've got my smaller brush. This is a Simply Simon's. And I'm just going to come around the daisy petals and just kind of do something like this. So at the base, I'm going to just kind of swing my brush up and kind of just create like a little bit of a petal texture, and use a little more water when I feel like I'm getting, I think that one's a little darker than I'd like it to be. And I'm just going to create these petals. Maybe what I'll do is go around and I'll do the top ones a little more watered down, so the ones that look like they're in front of the other ones, put a little more water on my brush and less pigment, and we'll do them first. Okay, this one I could water down a bit. It's almost too dark for what I want. I want to go darker for the second layer, so just dab that out a little bit. Sorry about that. Okay, this one's kind of in front. I'll get the water on there and then just a little bit of pigment. We can always throw a little more pigment kind of at the base of these as well. Just a little bit more. I'm going to add a little more texture, like I say, as I go. So let's see. This one looks like he's in front of the other ones. You can see if you look up closely, I'm kind of leaving a little bit of white space as well, right? I'm not just filling the whole thing in. Some of them are pretty much filled in, but some of them leaving a little bit of white space, and then I can always drop just a tiny bit of darkness kind of as it comes towards the center of the flower. So I'm just going to go around and do that here. Go a little darker on this one because this one's kind of behind the one in front of it. And then do a little bit here. And again, you can see I'm leaving little white gaps. So I'm going to do that exact same thing on this one in the front. Try and just, I've got my water like right here, and I'm just dipping the very, very tip of my brush into it when I want to create a little bit more of a watery mixture than what's on my brush already. So does that make sense? I'm basically just taking out of here, but then if I get on here and I'm like, that's a little bit too dark, I'll just like dip just the tip of the brush into the water. It's like right there. I'm like, yeah, it's dark. So let's get a little more water on the brush. More water. Even more. So I just keep dipping just the tip, because if I go too deep, my brush will be soaking wet and I won't get the effect I'm after. So I'm leaving some nice bright whites as I do this. I'm almost like creating stripes that are radiating out from the center of this daisy. And then when I come closer to the center, I can always drop a little bit more pigment, let it move around the way it wants to. And just kind of carry on. A few more. If I'm not careful, I'm going to have things bleed around, right? So I might let it dry and then come back in and do the ones that are behind in a minute here. So I think that's what I'm going to have to do. Almost everything is touching. This one is okay. I don't mind if they bleed together a bit. So I'll do this one. Give it a little bit more of that bluey color and just let it be. I'm not worrying about shadows so much. These are just, it's just creating texture. I can always decide if I want to add shadows as a second layer, because we are working on Arch's watercolor paper with this one. So it gives us a little bit of freedom. I'm going to let that dry for a minute, and then I will come back and add the other petals once this is dry. All right, so I've given this a minute to dry, and you can see I actually have a little bit of blooming happening there, but you know what? I'm okay with that. You could, if you really, really don't like that blooming look, you can clean it out when that happens. You can just re-wet it. I like using a firm brush for this, but you can always re-wet it with some water and then just kind of scrub that little line or that little bloom out. You can do that. Like I say, I don't always do that because I feel like sometimes the bloom adds to the beauty of the watercolor, but I know some people don't like that look. So that's what you can do if you don't like the look. And then I'm going to just come in here. This one I might as well just put a little more dark here and let it kind of fade out. And then I'll have to be careful I don't come around and touch this one again, because this one is clearly wet and it will bleed into other shapes. So let's move around it. Let's come down here, and I'm going to use the same color as I was using before, but I'm going to get a little darker. I'll show you where. So I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. Paint this with this kind of, again, watery mixture. You could always just water this down with more water rather than like doing what I'm doing, dipping it. When I'm too concentrated, I dip it into my little water jar over here, but you don't have to. You can just water your paint down more. Okay, then I'm going to drop more kind of at the base, and then I'm going to come and where these edges are meeting, so kind of like here and here. Do you see where it's meeting the one in front of it? I'm just going to dab my brush off a bit. I'm darkening that. I'll just blend that around a little bit. I'm getting some hard edges there. I'll just soften them a bit with my water. Anyways, let's come in here grab a little bit of this color and just, again, make this petal a little bit darker than the ones in front of it, kind of at the edges. And then we can kind of lighten off, add a little more water as we come to the center of it. See how that kind of pushes them behind? You can either start with the water or the pigment. I'm just going to put a little bit of water there. And again, when I come to the edges, move myself out of the way here. I'm putting a little bit more pigment, and then I'm letting it kind of fade out a little bit more as it comes to the edge. You know what? That's kind of confusing to do it the way I'm doing it. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to come in and I'm going to do basically the same thing I did before with this watered down mixture of blue, and then I'll come in and add the shadows after, because I think it's just too confusing to do how I started right there. And I'm going to just speed the camera up because I'm repeating the same steps for all of these petals that I did before, and then once those dry, I'll show you how to add shadow. And while my petals are drying, I'm going to come in and quickly add some daisy leaves. I'm going to start with the lighter green that I had, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some darker green. You know what I'm even going to do? I think I'm going to grab the Artegria brush so we get a little bit of a looser look to these leaves. And I'm just going to drop a little bit of water in them first. So we get, again, kind of a watercolor look. And I'm not going to worry about the fact that my leaves are still damp in some places, or sorry, my petals are still damp in some places, because I don't mind a little bit of bleed. Then I'm just going to come in here with this nice bright green, and I'm going to just kind of define it a little bit. I actually like this light green with this kind of periwinkle looking blue flower. I might not even bother throwing dark green in here. We'll see. I'm just kind of using the tip of the brush to create these right now, and just throw a little more water in because it's clearly too dry still. And I want to have things kind of just flow around and have a very watercolory look. Drop it in there. Yeah, I'm losing some of the watercolor look just because I was clearly too dry. So let's go ahead, drop more water so that we don't have that happen on the rest of these. Make them nice and soaking wet. And then I'll drop some more green in. Let's drop a little more over here while we're at it. Oh, I grabbed some of the darker out of my palette, obviously. Had enough dark over there. And that looks goofy, so I'm just going to use a little water and just encourage it around a little bit, because I think that looks weird. Got an extra little leaf there. Daisies can kind of have interesting leaves, I think, so I'm not... that's looking really weird. I'm inventing as I go. Those are kind of strange. Okay. Let's try this again. I'm happier with this time. I feel like I've got like the two greens going on my brush, because I've got some of the lighter green and some of the darker green. They were all kind of mixed together in there. So I'm happier with this leaf here. I'm not having to try so hard. Just more or less putting it along the outline. And as you can see, that was a happy accident, really, having both those greens going on my brush at once. I got a variety without really trying. So if you want a little more variety in any of your leaves, you can always just make up a darker green and just drop it in afterwards, like this one. Okay, say we want a little more variety. I could grab a little bit more of either of my blues. I grabbed some of the phthalo blue, mix it over here a little bit, and then just drop it in some places, maybe along the vein or something like that. It's not that dark yet. Something like that. Yeah, it's better, I think. What do you guys think? Is it better or worse? Again, we're trying to go loose, so try not to be too persnickety here. I want a loose effect where I just kind of drop that water in. Yes, my brush is kind of a mixture of water and a bit of pigment right now, so it's a little bit weird, but I want to drop a little more water in because I don't want to be too dry. And then we'll come around the edges of these, and I really like the tip of the Artegria brush for that. It kind of just, it's got a very, very, very fine tip, and it just lets that kind of almost create a very delicate edge to our little daisies, or I should say our daisy leaves. Like so. Maybe I'll just throw a little bit in here. I don't know if that's a good idea. Is that okay in there? It could be. I mean, there'd be some stems and whatnot. I don't know if this is a good idea to be throwing this extra bit of green in there. You guys decide if that looked weird or not. Okay, one more time. I could have just had 2 separate brushes going, but that's okay. I've got kind of a mixture again. My water and my green are a little bit on my brush together, but let's throw more green in and try and create some of these with the tip of our brush. I like that. I actually don't mind the fact this one's more faded out because it's lower down on here. Maybe I'll throw just a bit to help define just where it meets the little daisies. I'm going to call that good. Then let's do the centers. And I'm going to work with a firmer brush because I want to have more texture and maybe a little bit less of the watercolor look. And I'm just going to grab this kind of goldy color. It's mostly made with yellow, but it's got a little bit of my kind of like a muddy orange in there. So then I'm just going to come in here and actually let's get some watercolor look going. We can't do a base layer without water as the base, right? So let's just throw some water in there and then we can create a little bit of a watercolor look, and then we can come in for a second layer. So I'm just going to drop it in kind of like in a dotting way so that we get a little bit of texture. We'll see how well this lasts as I go around, because the water could make it disappear, but I like what I'm getting so far. So I'm going to go around and then I'm going to put extra towards the left, again, the crescent idea. And I'm going to do that over here and work my way over here. Oh, I like that. I really like how it's working when I'm just like dot, 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 dot. And it's sort of, I don't know, I'm surprised it's actually holding as much of its, like the definition, because when I feel like I had a lot of water on there and usually that would disappear if you're really wet, but I think it's okay. And maybe I will just add just a smidgen, almost like a brownish color, and I don't have that, so I'm just going to grab a little bit of red here, throw it into my gold color, and maybe a little bit of, I don't know, anything that's got some blue in it. It could be one of the purples, it could be a blue. We're just really trying to grab something that's more on the blue side. And I'm just going to see if I can make a little bit of a brown color here. It's a little bit too reddish, isn't it? I might need more blue. We'll try it. Let's just try it. Again, I'm just going on the very, very far, oh yeah, it's going to work fine. Very far left side. It's going to create a little bit of definition again. I'm just dropping like so, ding, 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 like that. I'm surprised that actually looks okay. I was thinking it was going to look too red. Sometimes you got to try it on the paper. Okay, yeah, I think I like that. This one is actually looking a little bit too stark. I like the way that's blended on this one. So I'm going to dry my brush and just use kind of a damp brush and just kind of, there we go. All right, I'm going to let that dry and then I'll decide if I want to add, it's almost fine the way it is, but I feel like these are kind of washed out. I could just throw a tiny bit more definition into the petals and then it would be done. Okay, so I've let everything dry once again, and so now we're on our final step, and I just want to add a few extra details. So I've got my same blue here, and I think I'm just going to maybe just put a little bit where the edges are meeting, and I don't want to be too, I don't know, too precise here. Just put a little bit kind of like on the petals that are behind. I want to darken them a bit now, rather than having done it in that previous layer, which would have just made it more overwhelming. So I'll just do it in this layer, and I'll just add just a few gentle little strokes on the petals themselves, just so that they, you know, it brings it a little bit to life, just so they're not too drab looking. I feel like the daisy rather is a little bit drab. So I'm just going to come in here and just every now and then just using, like, I'm not doing any wet on wet. I'm just coming on with the paint on my brush. So this is wet on dry. And I don't want to be so dry that things look scratchy, but just have enough paint on my brush that I can get the detail on there and then call it good. So some of these, I think I'm almost going overboard, aren't I? We don't want this to look like a blue daisy, and that's what it's getting close to. So I got to be careful here. I maybe dab a little of the paint off my brush. Once again, I'm thinking to kind of go behind where the edges are meeting. Whenever you put paint or a darker value kind of on the petal or whatever the object is that's behind, but in this case petal, it'll help visually push it back. Maybe I will put a tiny bit of water in here just to sort of soften it. Some of them just seem a little too harsh. I don't know. Just gently rub that around some of those. I don't know. Was that necessary? Not sure. Put a little bit back here. Again, it's just to help define the petal. Maybe a little bit here and here. Maybe a little bit. I'm getting very close to overdoing, I feel like. So I'm trying to just do this really quick and just get it on there, leave it alone. And like I say, if I'm wanting to push one petal behind the others, that's where I'm going to want to put that blue color. And I feel like I'm kind of slopping a little bit over here, but oh well, I don't want this to be a perfectionistic project. I want it to just be simple, and you kind of can get the idea, right? That I'll try and pay a little more attention to how I do it on this lower one. So let's hit the back petals first. And okay, too much water, too much paint on the brush. I think I'm getting a little bolder than I'd like to be. Still pretty bold. Okay, back petal. Some of these are even hard to tell which one was the back petal. Some of them are obvious, so let's do the obvious ones. And then we'll just do a few lines, creases, folds, just in the very center of all of them, just so we have a little bit more definition, because like I say, it was feeling just like it needed a little something here. Okay, a little bit more here. This is the one that's behind. And a little bit here. A little bit here. Well, that one's actually not so bad. I don't mind the way it's looking. It's in the front, but it has enough detail that I'm not minding that. I think that's pretty good. What do you guys think? You can always define yours a little more. This is an area, it's easy to get carried away, and I'm kind of worried I will do that if I'm not careful. This part here is bugging me though. Just feels like the back ones are, like the petals are just mushed together, so I have to define them a bit by just where the edges are meeting, one petal behind another. I'll darken it. Can probably get away with it because we could say it's in shadow over here. That's something I didn't pay a ton of attention to, was doing shadows and light source with this project. I want to keep it more simple and a little bit more playful. I think actually for the wreath, I'm just going to freehand it. So all I'm going to do is do a circle. And if you find it easier to draw a circle using like a mug or something, just whatever you find to help you draw a circle. So I just grab my eraser here, and I'm just lifting a little bit of the pencil out so it's not too dark, because I don't want it to be super strong. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do daisies on here. And I'm thinking to start it with dropping just the centers of the daisies in, and then I'll come back in and add the petals. The centers of the daisies I'm going to create with a little bit of paint. Now I have this muddy kind of orangey color, so I'm wondering if I just take a little bit of my yellow and drop it in here, if I'll get a color that I like for the center of my daisy. This one is going to be super, super loose and simple, so just do something like that. Yeah, I actually think that's almost okay if we just do a combination, maybe a little bit. I'll try and drag extra yellow to one side of here. And I think I'm going to be okay with that. Kind of that, see how it's over there? A little bit golden, and it's a little bit more brown here. I'll try and just use a combination of these two. I think I'll be happy with that. Oh, maybe a little bit more of the gold color. Something, yeah, let's try this. We'll drop it in there and see what we think. So what I'm going to do is maybe just drop, I'll have a water brush on hand too, so that if I feel like I'm making my centers a little bit too dark and boring, I can blend them around with water. And this is cheaper paper, so it will do sort of the blooming thing that was happening before. Do I want to mark out the centers? I wonder if I should. Let's try it. Okay, I'll just do a few little centers. I want to make it kind of give the impression of it being like a daisy chain. So maybe just, I'll group them a little bit. So you can see some of them are oval shape. That means I'm going to do them a little bit side profile. I'm going to try and freehand it, but like I say, I will provide a printable for it as well. Okay, let's see how this goes. I'm just going to take my water brush. I'm going to drop water in each of these really quickly. Just go around. Okay, now I'm going to do kind of a crescent shape with the yellow so that it kind of gives us a highlight. See, like that? So crescent shape. So I'm going to do the crescent. Whoops, you can see some of them are almost disappearing. I want to imagine that the lightest part, or the highlight, will be more to the left, or sorry, the right side, darker on the left. So I'm trying to make more of the crescent this direction and the light more this way. It's okay if it fills up, but you can kind of see what's happening there, right? I'm getting a little bit of a highlight in my centers. So let's just go around and do that to all of these. We just want, you can even kind of almost go around the whole outside of this little shape. You just want to try and keep in your mind you've got a little highlight there. Again, if you fill it all in, that's okay too. Some of mine will probably end up that way. I do actually like the color that's a little more on the gold side. We'll see. Yeah, I think I'm going more that direction. Now, some of these are drying already, or I didn't get enough water on them because some of them are hard edged. And if that's the case, you can leave it like that, or you can just drop a little bit of water into it, making a slop. Let's soak that up, dry it up a little bit. There we go, good enough. And put a little bit here, a little bit here, and a little bit here. Yeah, kind of like so. And then I'll just grab a little bit of this gold and just drop a tiny bit more just on the far left side as it's starting to dry. And that's going to just, again, I'm probably being anything but simple, but it's just going to create a little more definition in these little centers. And then I'm going to let it dry, and I'll come back and do the little daisy petals. All right, so with this one, I'm kind of inventing it as I go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, I think I might do some like pink and some white daisies on here. So to do that, I'm going to grab a little bit of my quinacridone rose. I think I'll go more with the quinacridone rose rather than the magenta color this time. And I'm just going to get a tiny, tiny little bit of it onto my brush, and mostly water. So I'm going to I dipped into my water jar again. And then I'm going to come and I'm going to do the ones that are like facing us first. So I'm going to just come and do some nice strokes like so to create these little daisies. And I'm letting the paintbrush create the strokes. I might even do a combination of paintbrushes here. I'm using the Simply Simons at the moment. I might switch over, you know that? I might switch over to these softer brushes. These are the Artegria. They hold more water, and it's going to give us kind of a looser effect. Then, while everything's still wet, I'm going to drop a little bit of it kind of more towards the center of this flower. So kind of like this. It'll give us a little bit of variety in our pink. Ooh, that was a lot. I'm just going to go ahead and dab it off. And like I say, this one is the cheaper paper, so it will behave a little differently than the arches did. So you can see we have a little bit of variety in that petal, or in that flower. So let's go ahead now and let's do the same thing. So just very little bit of pink, mostly water on my brush. And let's go do that on another one. So maybe this one right here. Oops. So I want to create, that's almost like two petals stuck together there because I got kind of fat, but this is going to allow me to have a little bit more of a point on my brush. When I'm using the Artegria brush, they come to a little bit more of a point, and they hold a little more water. So let's see how this one works when we add our pink this time. Ooh, very strong. Okay. Then I'll just guide it around a little bit. I don't mind having a little bit of blooming, right? You guys know that on this cheap paper. I kind of like that look. If I don't like blooming, I would really recommend you just use arches because it will make it way easier. Okay, I think that's cute. Let's go on to maybe one up here. We're just gonna have to jump around so that we don't have them blend together if we don't want to have everything kind of go mushy. Okay, I'm too pink right now. A little more water on my brush. Maybe even more water on my brush. Try that. And then this one, I'm just going to make it like it's going behind this one. So I'm actually not going to worry about getting all the petals just so over there. I'm going to just come over here, fill this in with a little bit of pink. And I'm going to let this part almost just fade because I'm going to do another daisy there. You know what? Why don't I do them, since it is kind of visually joining, I'm just going to go ahead and do that one. And they can maybe just, no, I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it. I'm going to go ahead and I could go work on one over here. And maybe I will do one of the white ones this time. You could just do the whole thing pink. I'm going to do a white daisy. Or like I say, you could do them all. All the kind of white color as well. This time I really don't want much of this blue color on my brush. And I'm going to paint the daisy. Ooh, daisy petals. This one, this very, very soft kind of light blue color. And then when I get all the way around, I'll drop a little bit more of it again at the center. That's going to help create some definition. We don't want to overdo because we don't want these to look like blue daisies either, right? But we need a little something to make them look like they're there. Just do something like that. Eesh, I slept up on that petal. Oh well, it's okay. Just refining them a little bit with the tip of my brush. And I could come and do one right here as well. Basically, I'm just trying to avoid touching them together at this stage. So get my paint very watered down. So I keep going back and forth between my water and my paint. We'll see what it is. Could even have more water, I think, to start with. We want enough that we see it, but not so much that it's, like I say, a blue daisy. Okay, a little bit of paint. Bring it to the center. Drop it. Just dropping it with the very tip of my brush at this point. You can even create a little bit of definition on the outside of these if they're kind of disappearing on you. Yeah, I think I like that. So I think you get the idea how I'm doing this, right? I'm going to go ahead and do a few more. I'll speed the video up because I think it's self-explanatory. And then when I get to somewhere they're overlapping and it gets a little more challenging, I will slow down again. All right, this particular daisy is one that I've sort of drawn like it's on its side, right? Now you can see I've pretty much gone in here with just water. I haven't even had paint on my brush, but I made my petals here when I put them down with water. Let me just add a little more water to my brush. I made these ones over at the front shorter, right? We talked about that before. They often look shorter at the front. So just keep that in mind. Once you move to the ones that are like to the daisies that are a little bit side profile, the ones that we did more of an oval shape center, you want to kind of think about making the front of them have shorter little petals because they're facing us. So they're just, it's a little bit of foreshortening happening where you can't see the full length. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to drop a little bit more into here. It might bloom around because it's starting to dry, but I feel like this one's getting too washed out and boring. At this stage, everything's wet, so I'm going to let it dry, and then I'll come back in and fill in those remaining flowers. And once again, doing water first. Let's need a little more water. Let's get a little bit more on my brush. It's too pink, right? I want the pink to be, I want that to be softer. I want this to be like just almost like a baby pink. Try this. You like that? Yeah, something like that. And you can see I've just basically filled in those petals, given the impression that it's behind. So I just filled in the petals that have their space for them, right? Kind of makes sense. And then I'll drop a little bit more bold pink, just kind of closer to the center. And I actually kind of like that one being a bit darker than the others because it is behind. So I might not worry about them being a little bit darker if they're behind. So let's just put a little more. And I'll do the same thing here. Kind of draw, if you will, our petals with our brush. And yeah, you can see where they're getting almost faded out. Let's just drop a little bit more right kind of around the center, like so. Yeah, I'm liking that. Is that okay? Should we go a little darker still? Oh, and by the way, I'm using the quinacridone rose. Maybe like that. I think I'm starting to get a little persnickety or something right now. I just feel like I'm getting a little too perfectionistic with my final details. Ooh, this one is interesting, what I did there. How am I going to paint that? Decide which one goes in front. I guess I'll do this top one on front. Too much pink. Grab a little more water. Yeah, I'm not minding that. Okay, this is going to be interesting. It's almost like these two are squished together or something. Oh well, we will just go with it, and I probably will do it all at the same time because I don't really want to have to dry it and just do that one single one at the end. So I'll just go ahead and fill this one in, and then I'll come back in with the pink again, but I'll just try and kind of create some simple loose petals, and then drop a little bit more of this color just at the very center, and once again it's going to fade out. I think I like that. Kind of like so. Yeah, I think that's okay. This one, I wonder if I could put a little bit more on. It might create blooms, but I'm going to try it on these last two that are still wet, just to kind of push them a little further back, make them a little more bright. Yeah, I think that's actually kind of pretty. You know what? I'm noticing I missed one here, didn't I? You guys probably all noticed that before me. Oh well. A little bit of pink on my brush, and just kind of fill those in, just teeny weeny little bit, and then throw the pink once again at the center, a little bit there. And that will create a little definition, kind of push it behind. Is that good enough? Yeah, I think that's good enough. Okay. Now for the leaves, do I want to do them while everything is wet or wait for it to dry? And this area here is I'm a little uncertain because of the way this is so thick here. I feel like I'm going to want a few more leaves here to make up for this larger clump of flowers here. That part's kind of a little bit, I don't know why, but it's one of those things I'm looking at going, you know what, I think I need to just maybe use a pencil and draw a few simple lines just to kind of show maybe where I want to put them. I don't know. That's looking cloned. That looks really goofy. Maybe something like this. Yeah, maybe like that. It doesn't look as bad as it did. I don't know. Maybe I'm being persnickety. Maybe here. Yeah. I just decided, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and give myself these little lines to kind of guide me for my leaves. If you're pretty confident with working loose, just go for it. You don't need to have pencil lines. I was just feeling like I needed a little bit of something to help me feel like I know what I was doing, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think I'm happy with that. But, you know, look, you can even see I went a little further than maybe I would have liked to here. So that's where, I don't know, doing it with pencil first can sometimes help you catch the things you might not like yourself doing if you were to go straight with paint. But some people do just fine going straight in with paint. And if that's you, that's great. Just go for it. You don't have to follow me in giving yourself all these guidelines. This is just me. I think I like that better. But if I had done that with paint, I would have been, you know, disliking things that I had done. And the thing I will do a little bit is just erase them a smidge so that they're not as bold. I want them to guide me, but not to kind of be the first thing you notice when you look at this little wreath. Right, and they are, I would say these pink flowers are mostly dry, which is great because it's going to keep things from bleeding. It is a pretty thing to have the green kind of mingle with the pink sometimes, but in this case, I'm thinking I'm going to be okay with it not. And I've got my Ortegria brush again soft, and maybe we'll see. We'll see if we like this green. I'll do a few leaves in this light green, and if I feel I need darker green, I can mix them up. So I'll start with this. And I'm going to do my leaves just kind of this basic, simple way of like using my brush and going thin and then a little heavier pressure and then light pressure to kind of taper off at the end. I'm not going to worry about, you know, precision or like perfect daisy petals for how daisies petals are. I'm just keeping these petals super simple. And I'm wondering if that isn't too pastel. It's too pastel, isn't it? Well, we'll do a few pastel leaves, and we can always come back in and go a little bit darker if we think we need to. I don't know. I kind of like the light color. I'm kind of not 100% sure. I might go ahead and mix up a darker green, or at least a little bit of something, because I just feel like these are, it's a beautiful spring green. I'm just feeling like they're almost disappearing. You know what? I'm just going to do more and decide as I go. Get more on here, and then if I really still feel that way, I can mix up more and just drop some in a few places. Yeah, you know what would look really pretty? If I just use a little bit of my blue. Be really nice to mix it into here and just get just a little bit of that. It's such a puddle, it's not going to stay separate. Let's try this. Let's try a little bit of the ultramarine blue and see if we can drop a little bit of it. Just try what happens if I drop a tiny bit into these. Yeah, that's too blue. Wipe it off a little bit. We will get some like kind of blossoms or blooms rather in our paint, and I'm okay with that with this. I honestly think that's the beauty of the cheap paper, is it really creates those blossoms or blooms or cauliflower shapes, whatever you want to call them. It happens too easily on cheap paper, and I'm like, you know what? That's a great opportunity to just go for that look. So that's my common way, not always, but common way that I handle the cheap paper is that I actually try and like let it be puddly and cauliflowers and have a little bit of that bloomy look. I said that word a few too many times now. Ooh, okay, that's way too dark. You can see I'm really just mixing on my palette, and then I grab my ultramarine blue and sometimes go a little too heavy. Let's just use a thirsty brush and soak it up a smidgen little bit. That really doesn't look great. Try and make these leaves a bit bigger. Okay. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go around doing the same thing as I was doing here, where I'm just throwing a touch more blue in with my green. And then I will, when I'm happy with those leaves, and I'm doing anything else that's interesting, I will let you know. Otherwise, I'll just carry on doing these steps. And then I'll be back once I finish filling these leaves. And then I'm just kind of taking a little bit of artistic license to throw in some smaller leaves and even just fill in some of the gaps that are missing here, or gaps that I have between the flowers and the leaves. So you can just do whatever you want with these little spaces. Another cute way you can fill in these little spaces is to just do some little, almost like curly tendrils. I know daisies aren't like a sweet pea, but I kind of like that. I think it just adds a cute little final touch just to fill in a few spots that are left. In fact, why don't we even do some little dots? I'm noticing this side of our wreath is looking a little bit like lighter than this one, so I'm just throwing in a tiny little bit more green. Yeah, or even the darker, kind of the blue-green color. Yeah, I think that's better. Just do whatever works for you and whatever feels kind of like it's gonna just add to things. You can always throw a little bit of this same kind of slightly darker green, just to create some little veins in the centers of these if you want to, but otherwise I think I'm happy with that. So there we have our birth month flowers for the month of April, daisies and sweet peas. I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, that it will bless whoever you share these with, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!